Our next group is one which is used many times within the Gospels, but often misunderstood by us because we don't understand context. The group that I'm referring to are the Samaritans. Now, the Samaritans are not named after a group, they're named after a place. And that was the capital city, which was Samaria. Now, Samaria is really right in between the two Jewish enclaves. You've got the Jewish enclave of Galilee and the Jewish enclave of Judah. And in between, we have the area called Samaria. Now, of course, that only is the time of Jesus. But to find the origins of the Samaritans, one has to go much earlier. In fact, one has to go back to the 8th century BCE, to the time of the Assyrians. Now, when the Assyrians came in and destroyed the northern kingdom of Israel, the way in which the Assyrians were able to maintain order within their empire was in a method of dispersing the local peoples through their empire and then bringing their empire people into that local area. And so by doing that, they diluted the bloodstrain, they diluted the group. And so by virtue of that, created a new group, a group which was half Assyrian and half whatever the empire was or the particular area was that they had conquered. And that way, they were able to keep their revolts under control. And that's what happens after 722 when Israel is destroyed, is that this mixing of the Jews that remained, or at least the Israelites that remained, and then the Assyrians that came to them, created a new group, a new ethnic identity. This ethnic identity was neither now Israelite, nor was it Assyrian. It was a new group. And the new group was named after, or becomes named after, the capital city of Samaria, and so get known as the Samaritans. That group continues to survive in that area even after the destruction of Judah by the Babylonians. And so when the Babylonians come in later on in the 6th century and move all the Judeans out to Babylon, and the people now just continue to live there, there's a little bit of enmity that begins to start developing. A little bit of anger, of hatred begins to develop between those Samaritans and the Jews that are there. That gets to a particular place it becomes an explosive opportunity when, in fact, when the Persians take over and allow the Jews to come back. And when they come back in, they want to reestablish Jerusalem. They want to reestablish the walls. They want to reestablish the temple. And it's at this point that the Samaritans realize that now they might actually be taken over in their own country. That in fact these returning Jews may change the balance of power, and that may actually take over their area again. And so what begins to happen is the conflict begins to develop between the Samaritans and these returning Jews, and this returning nationhood that begins to develop in Judea. That enmity then begins at that point. So we're talking about the end of the 6th century, the beginning of the 5th century BC. So you can imagine that enmity develops and grows and becomes more and more acute. We know that in fact the Jews went and destroyed a temple in the Samaritan area in that period afterwards. We also know that the Maccabees decided to take over the Galilean area and so squeeze the Samaritans between two Jewish perspectives. So by the time Jesus comes along, that hatred now is hundreds of years old. There's now so much water under the bridge. There is so much blood that's gone under that bridge as well, that the two groups constantly hate each other. The Jews hate the Samaritans because they're neither Jew nor Gentile. The Samaritans are half-caste. They also believe in some parts of Tanakh, but not the whole Tanakh. They only follow Torah, but not the prophets. And so the Jews themselves look at the Samaritans as being somehow lesser than even the Gentiles are. To the point where, in fact, when the Jews wanted to travel from Galilee down to Judea, instead of traveling south straight through the environment of the Samaritans, they would rather go around into Gentile territory of the Decapolis and then the Transjordan, and then cross over again the Jordan in order to get to Judea, rather than travel on Samaritan ground. So the enmity, the hatred is hundreds of years old. It's something which is part now of the fabric of that space. Now we need to know that. Otherwise, whenever Jesus mentions Samaritans within the Gospels, we don't really understand just how deep was the enmity between them. How deep was that hatred? And that's why when we see things like, for example, the parable of the Good Samaritan, we need to realize just how offensive that parable would have been for the Jews hearing it. As far as the Jews were concerned, Samaritans were only good for one thing, and that's to be killed. And yet here was a Samaritan helping a Jew, overcoming all those years of prejudice, all those that the indoctrination that had happened over all those hundreds of years, was able to overcome all that in order to help somebody who was in need. So knowing who the Samaritans were changes the way in which we understand their relationship with the Jews. We understand also the fact that when Jesus talks to the Samaritans the way he does and speaks about Samaritans the way he does, how offensive that would have been for the Jews to hear. And yet also how much of a change that would make in their prejudice and their perspective.